Hello and welcome to today's episode of our series focusing on careers. My name is Imogen and today I'll be talking to Christopher, who is a senior gardens advisor. Hello, Christopher, and welcome.
Hi, Imogen. Thank you very much. Great to be here.
So before we talk a little bit about what your job involves, would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself and sort of how you ended up in your current job?
Okay. I've never had a great plan of what I wanted to do. And maybe some people say, well, I don't know until I grow up, and I'm not sure I've reached that point yet. But I've always thought I want to do something that I enjoy. And when I was younger, I loved being outside. I was lucky enough, my parents had a small garden. And when I was leaving school, I thought, well, might as well do what I enjoy and go and do some gardening. I wasn't entirely sure what that involved, so I went along to my local National Trust site and talked to the head gardener there, and that kind of started me off in my career in horticulture. I ended up in my current job having kind of wanted to focus on historic gardens, so I did a dissertation when I went away and studied in authenticity of historic garden restoration projects, and I've been lucky enough to work at Kew and with the Royal Horticultural Society, slowly perhaps getting further and further away from the plants that first got me into what I was wanting to do. But I still find enough enjoyment, and actually turning my attention to kind of supporting those that are doing much more of the practical work, and getting the best out of them for them and their teams and the gardens and our visitors is kind of a type of role that I was interested in. This job came up as maternity cover, and I've been lucky enough that to take the role on full time, and I've been doing it for almost 14 years now.
Brilliant. That's really interesting. What does your job actually involve, and like sort of what's your day-to-day life look like with it? I'm sure it's different every day.
Yes, I suppose everything is different every day, as kind of every garden is different. And I often say that the only common thread across all of our gardens is that they're all different. But I suppose my job is encapsulated in trying to get the best out of the English heritage gardens, for their conservation, for their kind of history and all of that side of things. And then making sure that they're amazing places for visitors to go and enjoy as well. And being the professional lead for our gardens teams, so that when anything kind of problematic comes up, I can try and support that, through to going kind of banging the drum to make the most of our gardens across all of the teams that are kind of all across English heritage. There's a lot of driving a computer. There's a lot of walking around gardens. I much prefer the latter. And at some points, it's catching up with a head gardener, having a nice cup of tea and chewing the fat over kind of how things are going on site, through to going to a meeting about making the most out of that garden, or solving a problem that the head gardener and others have kind of come across and need support from the wider organisation to solve.
Would you say you have a particularly favourite site? Oh, I come from the south, so I expect you to say somewhere in the south, but if it's up north, that's fine.
That's right. And I used to be national. So for about 7 or 8 years or so, I used to cover all of England and all of the garden teams. We had 12 sites where we had dedicated garden teams, and about a further 7 or 8 which were kind of managed remotely by those teams. So I've been able to enjoy all of the gardens so far. And I suppose my favourite possibly comes down to the one I last visited. But if you were to really squeeze me, I would probably say it's somewhere like Down House, just for the amazing kind of history of Darwin, but also kind of the feeling of the place as well. It's very much a domestic scale garden set in an amazing landscape of fields, if you kind of ignore the modern conurbations and Biggin Hill Airport, that sort of thing. And it's got a kind of a real sense of atmosphere. The head gardener currently there, Anthony, we actually trained together for several years. We went to the same university and we had the same experience of middle year at Bristol Botanic Garden. So yeah, there are a number of reasons I choose Down, but you could ask me in 5 minutes and I could probably select Warmer. Ask me 5 minutes later and it could well be Eltham. Yes, they're all amazing.
Yeah. What sort of projects do you get involved in? How do you start a project? What does that sort of process look like?
It all depends, I suppose, on the scale of a project. So within garden terms, there are kind of projects that a head gardener can just get on with. But in organisational terms, there are bigger projects that kind of many more get involved in. But I think the common thread through all of those is understanding the significance and the history of the place and what we're trying to then do. So my starting point with all projects is understanding the place and getting to grips with the conservation management plan, making sure that there's enough information that we can draw from there, or to go and ask colleagues or do some research to help focus in a particular area if we're trying to develop that or represent it or something like that. So the starting point is always there. If it's a garden-led project with a kind of a head gardener in charge, and it's kind of a representation of a border or a tweak to the planting, something like that, then it would be very much working with them. They understand their sites. I hope we've supported them enough in kind of knowing the area. They know their plants. So it's working with them and reviewing kind of a new planting plan, a new design for an area based on kind of the evidence that we've got. Bringing in site-based colleagues that might have an input into that as to kind of how the area might be used for visitors, getting the sign-off for that with our property curators, and making the most of it by making sure that our marketing and PR colleagues know all the valuable work that's going in and the wonderful things that people can kind of see in the future. And that just kind of scales up. So I've been involved in some amazing projects over the years at various sites where the project manager has kind of led all of that, and I've been working as part of the team to support the understanding, but also support the operation of how do you manage that landscape, how do you manage that garden once the work has been finished.
With gardens that you're trying to recreate what they potentially would have looked like in the past, so I know they've done this at Rest. They've made the gardens, lots of different areas look like different periods of the history of Rest Park. Yeah. When you're restoring gardens and there's a really vast history behind the site, how do you decide on which area of the history it should be represented in the gardens?
That's a really good question. And that kind of gets to the nub of it, because it's your understanding of the different significances in the different periods of time that would then enable you to kind of fit the jigsaw back together to present something that is coherent and understandable, as well as enjoyable and usable. So there are some sites where the layers are pretty consistent, or there is one significant key layer that actually it's the no-brainer to go and restore to. So for Elton Palace, that is the Courtauld period, because that was key in the kind of conservation of that site and how much of the building and how much of the landscape can now be seen. And it would be kind of a fruitless task to try and go and back any further into the medieval layers, because actually that's all underground. We'd be stripping away significant portions of history of that site if we were to do so. And any later, we're perhaps kind of confusing the story of and that pure presentation that the Courtaulds had. Though even there, we need to and try and weave in some of those other histories of when the Royal Army Education Corps was there and when it was looked after by Royal Parks. And in some ways, some of the things that they've put in actually help us in presenting the site that is usable for a visitor experience, and not just for the Stephen and Virginia as their small family enjoying it with their friends. It then becomes a lot more complex, where you've perhaps got a bigger site and you've got different people doing things at different times in different styles. So it's kind of how do those interplay with each other, and kind of Rest Park is an interesting case in point, because there have been so many people involved over 300 years. Though in some ways it's relatively simple, because Capability Brown, when he was employed to do some landscaping work, was probably actually kept on a fairly tight leash and was there to kind of manage the waterways and kind of some of the refinements, so didn't sweep away kind of broad swathes that we think, oh, well, we'd rather like some of that back or the like. So it always comes back to kind of knowing who's done what at what time, and then putting kind of a value judgment with all the evidence in front of you as to what is the most significant, what is the most important, and what will kind of come together in combination to kind of, present a site as a whole.
Brilliant. That's really interesting to sort of hear about. Do you have a particular project that you sticks out more than others that you've been involved in?
Yes, there have been a few. It's again like the question about what's your favourite garden. It's often the one that you've been kind of most involved with recently. But actually, I suppose because I visited Elton quite recently and being able to look at how the garden has been transformed with some of the project work recently, but then also thinking back in 2015, we were restoring the rock garden. And yeah, there were lots of challenges on site and things like that, but seeing how that has now stood up, and also in some ways that we were relatively lucky. We were doing some more research on the landscape. We were looking at the conservation management plan. We were trying to work out all of those things that I was talking about in working out kind of what layers and what we could do. And the rock garden is such an important feature and had been reinterpreted several times in its history. We knew that it was important to Stephen Courtauld because he used to go rock climbing in the Alps. In the bedroom, he's got the Kew wallpaper, but when they took the Country Life photograph, sat on his bedside table was Reginald Farrier's seminal work on rock gardens from the 1930s and things like that. So it's kind of, well, we must do something with this. We had some evidence in aerial photography, but some of it was a bit obscured, and we were kind of scratching our heads about, well, which direction to go in, and did the kind of the rivers of grass actually come all the way down to the bottom? How was the stonework? Have we got any missing? And several people said, oh, well, it's impossible to restore. You won't be able to do that. We don't know enough about it. We don't know where the rocks were. We don't know where this, that, and the other, some rocks have gone. But actually this small album of photos kind of came to light with some colleagues in another part of the organization, and they came and said, well, have you seen this? And it's kind of no. And there was a kind of 2 pages in was the picture of the rock garden from ground level looking across the wet moat. And it was kind of, yeah, that's what we were trying to do. And that kind of ties in, and oh, we didn't know that, but we now know it, and we'll put it back. And kind of seeing that now mature and develop, there's still more work to be done and things like that. But that gave a lot of satisfaction in being able to do.
Thank you very much, Christopher, for coming and talking to us today. It's been really interesting to hear about your job and the route you took to get to your current job. And hopefully everyone has been able to get something out of this. If you head over to our YouTube channel, there are more videos about different careers within English heritage. So thank you for watching.
Thanks, Imogen.